This is the Ramana Maharshi Upadesa Saram satsang, a time to listen, reflect, and deeply inquire into the self. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting the satsang. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I've been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice that I bring to this satsang. This week I'll continue with Ramana Maharshi's text, Upadesa Saram, Essence of Instruction. I'll cover verses 11 through 15, in which Ramana deals with Raja Yoga, or discipline and meditation. I'm using Professor Swami Nathan's translation. Now to the text. Verse 11. Holding the breath controls the mind. A bird caught in a net. Breath regulation helps absorption in the heart. Here Ramana talks about pranayama, breath control, practice in yoga. One form is a long breath in. Hold for a moment, maybe 2 beats, then breathe out. Long breath out. Repeat a few times. The point is to use your breath to calm and steady your mind. This prepares it for inquiry. Long before I read this, I'd been using my breath with mindful breath watching to ease my way into self-inquiry. At the beginning, I would sit to meditate for 20 minutes, and maybe the first 18 were breath watching, but then I was also able to inquire for 2 minutes. The time I spent watching decreased, and the time in inquiry increased. Now this breath watching is just a normal part of my inquiry. The next verse, verse 12, mind and breath, as thought and action, fork out like two branches, but both spring from a single root. Thought and breath flow together. Calm one, and you calm the other. One way to do this is with long, slow breaths from the abdomen. There's a link between the abdomen and the brain, where the brain takes its cues from the abdomen as to whether the brain should be excited or calm. You can use this method to calm the brain. Take one long, slow breath from the belly, then slowly release it. Doing this maybe 10 times will calm your mind, making it easier to meditate. Now the next verse, verse 13. Absorption is of two parts, two sorts, submergence and destruction. Mind submerged rises again. Dead, it revives no more. When you succeed in calming your mind through breath control, The peace lasts only as long as you maintain the control. When you release the control, the mind goes back to its old tricks. There's another way, though, to end the hold of the mind. This is to really discover that the mind as a separate entity never really existed to start with. If you look deeply in inquiry, you may be able to see that the mind only reflects the consciousness which you are. It has no consciousness of its own. It has no existence on its own. It has only dependent existence. It does not exist on its own. If it doesn't exist and never existed, if it was only an assumed imagination, then what hold could it possibly have on you, the absolute existence? This is something that as you know deeply within yourself, then the mind starts to lose all its power. The next verse, breath controlled and thought restrained, the mind turned one way inward, fades and dies. The mind holds to external and internal objects of thought. Release the hold, and the mind, having nothing to do, just kind of melts away. It depends on these objects, like an inchworm depends on the thing it holds in order to move. It cannot move. It cannot exist on its own. This reveals the mind has no separate existence. Its existence is entirely dependent, on one hand, dependent upon the objects to which it holds, and on the other, dependent on the reflection of absolute consciousness to be able to know anything. Dependent existence means it does not exist on its own. Know this, and the mind is destroyed. You can still use the mind to act in the world, but it has no longer any hold on you. It's just a tool, a system of the body. The last verse for today, verse 15. Mind extinct, the mighty seer returns to his own natural being and has no action to perform. Who is the seer? It's called the unknown knower of all the known. And at the same time, this seer is always known. It is you. It is the knowing of the experience of existing in this moment, now. Who can say that this is not known? It's just not known cognitively by the mind, like all the objects the mind works with. The seer is not an object. It is the subject, not the object. When you know this more deeply, you'll see that it is the object as well as the subject. This is non-duality. Reality is non-dual, no subject and no object, all subject and object, empty, void, full, and complete. All are true. All are false also. And this is who you are. From this context, what is there to do? What there is to be. Actions are like a dream. They do not touch you. You are not burned by the flame, nor caressed by the lover. The flame, the lover, these come and go. And here you are, now, knowing yourself, and filled with the happiness of being. So now we have coming our videos for today. First is from Swami Adyasakti, talking about these same verses, verse 11 through verse 15.
Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala.
Namaste. Welcome to the 5th episode of Upadesa Saram. Today we're going to talk about Raj Yoga. Before I get to the material, I just want to explain something to everybody. That when I'm making these videos, it's not like I sit down with a bunch of books and assemble a bunch of materials and then, riff talk based on that. No, I actually work with the methods that are described in the text.
Excuse me? It has to restart. My apologies.
Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala.
Namaste. Welcome to the 5th episode of Upadesa Saram. Today we're going to talk about Raj Yoga. Before I get to the material, I just want to explain something to everybody. That when I'm making these videos, it's not like I sit down with a bunch of books and assemble a bunch of materials and then, riff talk based on that. No, I actually work with the methods that are described in the text to get a feel for how they work and what they are. And only then do I report my experiences. So before doing this episode on Raja Yoga, I said, I've never actually tried Raja Yoga. I should go back and check it out. And so it was very interesting. And I'll get to my experiences in a little bit after I have read a couple of the shlokas and defined what we're talking about here. So in this section of Upadesa Saram, Bhagwan discusses Raja Yoga, and the principle of Raja Yoga is to use the breath to control the mind. Now, why is that important? Well, up till now, we've looked at selfish karma, which only leads to rebirth, and unselfish service, which can lead to bhakti. Bhakti is very powerful because it helps us to surrender, to give up the sense of I, and especially the sense of being the doer, and allow the self to take over. Things always go better when the self is in control than when we try to be in control. But in Raja Yoga, again, one becomes the doer. And I think this is very interesting, especially when you hear my experiences, you'll understand why I'm amused by this. Now, the limitation with any method in which one sees oneself as the doer is that even if one attains samadhi by it, that samadhi is just temporary. Like before doing this series, if you've been following along, I started a series on Purna Yoga, Purna Samadhi Yoga, with the idea being that in any of the chakras, one can attain samadhi by bringing that to its highest energy level. The only problem is it's temporary. And why? The root cause of that being temporary is that I am the doer. I am doing this yogic process. I am bringing the energy up to a certain point. I am going into this samadhi. And then I'm coming out of it again. In other words, it doesn't lead to full permanent enlightenment, which is what we want. So I had to think over it. Why did Bhagwan even include this section? And I think it has a lot to do with his own story and how he attained enlightenment at the age of 16 by going into a simulated death experience. He actually laid down on the floor, made his whole body stiff, and stopped breathing. That's a key part of his description. And he discovered something beyond the mind. So, of course, any of us can do that. But let's let him tell his story. In verse 11 and 12, he says, "By restraining the breath within, the mind will also subside like a bird caught in a net. This practice of breath restraint is a device to restrain the mind." And why is that? In the next verse he says, "Mind and breath are two branches which have knowing and doing as their respective functions, but their origin is one." So the mind, consciousness, or knowing in general, is called the Nyana Shakti, whereas doing is called the Kriya Shakti. And Bhagwan says they're both two branches of one tree. And that tree is the Savita Shakti, like in the Gayatri mantra, the word Savitur, Tat Savitur Varenyam. We surrender to that Savita, that source of energy. We have to anyway, but to do it consciously, to accept that this source of energy is my root, helps us in transcending the ego and, again, the sense of being the doer. So, mana and prana are the two branches. Mana means mind, prana means breath or life energy. These are the two branches of the Savita Shakti. And you could say they're like a light and a fan on an electrical circuit, on the same circuit. So if you switch one off, the other one also goes off. You'll notice if you control the mind through, let's say, Buddhist style meditation, the breath will become almost non-existent. And similarly, if you control the breath through Hatha Yoga style exercises, Kumbhaka and so on, that the mind will become very peaceful, silent. And this stillness is a prerequisite for complete enlightenment. I'm having a hard time talking about this stuff. My mind wants to jump into samadhi. I just happen to be in a kind of a chatty mood. Otherwise, I've been doing a lot of sadhana. So anyway, so this seems like a good thing, isn't it? Huh? If we simply do a little pranayama or a little breath control, that the mind will also stop? Well, it's good as far as it goes. It gives us a glimpse, a preview of what things are going to be like when the real samadhi happens. So the next verse says, subsidence of mind is of two kinds, abeyance, laya, and destruction, nasha. That which is in abeyance, laya, will arise. But if the mind dies, it will not rise. So actually the goal is to have the mind die, quote unquote. It doesn't really die, but what happens is it becomes subservient to the self. You know, language is so poverty-stricken. Actually, the mind is already subservient to the self. Self only loans it to the ego. And there are conditions. It's not unconditional, which is why sometimes the mind seems to rebel. I want to meditate and my mind goes running off all over the cosmos. Why? It's because the ego, wants to meditate. Huh? Maybe I want a gold star or something, on my record from my guru. Oh, good boy, you meditated. Isn't that great? Or maybe I want to show off. I can make my mind silent. You see photos of these gurus, with these big eyes looking all scary. They're trying way too hard because the mind is not really under control of the I, the ego I, the false I. Mind is an agent of self. And when self is attained, the mind becomes controlled automatically. Well, wait a minute. We're getting ahead of our story here. Okay. Either the mind will subside temporarily, laya, lie down, but then it gets up again and starts running around. And there isn't a lot we can do about that if we insist on being the doer. But if we actually realize that I am the self, or rather the self only is, and this little false I is just a temporary illusion, just a bubble of foam on the ocean of consciousness. Once we realize that, the mind automatically comes under control, automatically becomes silent, automatically becomes disciplined by the self. And this is the true enlightenment. So even though the mind temporarily goes away during sleep, deep sleep, then it comes back again during dreams and waking consciousness. Or even if we faint or go into a coma or even die, the mind is temporarily restrained, but then when we come out of it again, mind is right there with a fresh load of vasanas or tendencies from our previous experience and drawn by our karma. So we only really experience happiness when the mind is silent, isn't it? This is a very interesting observation that you can make. That the happiness which is obtained by satisfaction of desires is not actually due to enjoying the object of desire. but rather it's due to the relaxation of effort and the subsidence of the desire for that object. Like everybody's running around trying to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, isn't it? Putting tremendous effort into it, taking all kinds of unnecessary risks, doing all kinds of stuff that you don't really want to do, but you do it to keep up the status quo in the relationship market. So anyway, I'm so glad I'm out of that. Anyway, so then let's say we get the ideal boyfriend or girlfriend. Isn't that great? Huh? You know, but actually most of the pleasure involved comes from being able to let go and drop this tremendous effort, this running around searching for a mate. Isn't it? Look at it. The next time you get a moment like that, take a good look at it. See how much of it is due to enjoying the object of your desire and how much of it is due to stopping the quest, stopping the effort of running after this thing. Like, I finally got it. Now I can relax. So this kind of happiness isn't really satisfying because it fades. Again, desires will arise, and again we go running after their satisfaction. I'm not talking about ordinary desires like to eat or to take care of the trivial needs of the body. I'm talking about the big kind of mental desires like I want this certain title, I want this certain designation, I want this particular identity or recognition by others, or these big desires that take a lot of effort and time. As soon as we can drop these, we feel so much relief. But even that is not real happiness. Real happiness is when the mind becomes silent permanently. One time Bhagwan said, you know, as much effort as it takes you to make your mind silent, that's how much effort it takes me to form a thought. Now that's happiness. That's the real state of peace. So Ramana explains this in the path of Sri Ramana. For destroying the mind, it is enough if thoughts are destroyed. Let us therefore find out what thoughts actually are. This scrutiny is not an idle way of passing time. Is not the entire world struggling for happiness? Even this scrutiny is undertaken in view of obtaining that same happiness. Then what is the difference between the efforts of humanity in general and this effort undertaken by a spiritual aspirant? The efforts of worldly people lead only to a fleeting semblance of happiness, whereas the effort of an aspirant, self-inquiry, paves the path to perfect, eternal, and unlimited happiness. Therefore, this research is far more important and worthy than all other kinds of human endeavor. So this is why we talk about yoga, self-inquiry, as being the highest form of any kind of meditation. So in that light, this Raja Yoga is also just a step on the path. It's just a doorway to deeper, more complete realization through self-inquiry. There is a particular quality of the thought I, which is unique. The first person, I am. Second person is you, are. Third person is he, she, or it is. Thoughts of the second and third person, when inquired into and indulged repetitively, simply increase the agitation of the mind. They become more solid, more disturbing. But the thought I am, when it's inquired into, disappears. Why is that? Well, the thought I am has a unique distinction of being the root thought of the mind. So when the root thought is addressed, the whole thing just collapses. I guess now is a good time to tell my story. The whole world actually is based on the mind. And the proof of that is that when we enter deep sleep at night, or even ordinary dreaming sleep, the whole world disappears. Isn't it? When we dream, we see an alternate universe, a fictitious dream world. And then when we enter deep sleep, there's no world at all. Nothing happens. Nothing to be seen or experienced. So then when the mind again awakens, all the vasanas come up and we again see the world in all its glory and variety. This is the proof that the world is actually due to the mind, not the other way around. Otherwise, we would perceive the world at all times, and we don't. So that means if we change our consciousness, we also change the world. Isn't it? I'll give you a very trivial example. If you've ever been in love, infatuation is something that comes and goes very quickly within a few days. But our life doesn't change that quickly. Maybe we still have the same job, or going to the same school, or living in the same house, or whatever. Yet, when we're infatuated, when we're in love, and the hormones are raging, that world seems transformed. Many songs have been written about this. How, when a person is in love, the world is suddenly like springtime, everything is blooming, everything is beautiful, everything is great, right? And then when the inevitable happens and the love is over, then the whole thing is useless. There's a very beautiful song by Gilberto, Brazilian composer, called Useless Landscape. And that's it. The girl is singing, without you, here's this beautiful landscape of mountains and trees. I can see all the way to the ocean, and yet it's all useless because you aren't here. So you see, without this love, or without this beautiful consciousness, the world actually changes. So anyway, I was practicing this yoga, Raja Yoga, by restraining the breath and going into samadhi. And I finally got to Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's the first time, really, that I've got to it by this method. And I'm telling you, within 15 or 20 minutes, I had 3 women knocking on my door. Now, I mean, nobody comes to my place, huh? My place is way out in the middle of nowhere. You can hear it, so quiet, huh? Just a few birds, that's all. But suddenly, bang, 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 ding dong, ding dong. And they wouldn't go away. They wouldn't stop. I was coming out of it very slowly because I was really deep, really gone. But they just kept knocking on the door. They wouldn't stop. So if you want to change your world, I mean, I can see people who want power, who want siddhis, yogic powers and stuff, using breath control to get it. It makes sense. That's why it's called Raja Yoga. It's a favorite of kings. Kings like to be at the center of everything. They like to be very influential in their universe. And they like to cause things, make things happen. Or people who want to develop mystic powers. They all use breath control as a means of entry to those siddhis. And the reason is clear, because it's a very powerful way of changing your universe. However, the changes are only temporary, and there's no way to make them permanent. So, I want to finish this up because I don't want to go too long here. The next verse. If one makes the mind, which has subsided by restraining the breath, go on the one path of knowing and becoming one with self, its form will die. So here is the critical point, and this is the junction between Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga, between yoga, which is done by will, by a person who conceives himself the doer, and the process of dissolving the doer entirely. So, as usual, I have way too much material. I don't want to make this an hour video. So I'm going to publish a lot of it in the remarks, in the comments. But there's some great conversations between Bhagwan and some of the inquirers. The next verse says, for the great yogi who is established as the reality due to the death of the mind form, there is not any action to do, because he has attained his nature, his natural state of self-abidance. So for one who abides in the self, what is there to do? He's complete. He already is everything. He has everything. His consciousness has no boundaries anymore. So the bliss of consciousness being aware of itself alone is his world. So other than just live out the prarabdha karma, the ripened karma for this body, he has nothing to do. He has no goal. He has no desires. This is the essence of the fourth path realization in Buddhism. That one realizes that desire, ego, and action are all mutually interdependent. As soon as one falls down, the other ones do too. So in other words, whatever path of yoga we may take as a preliminary discipline, whether it's bhakti or raja or mantra or karma yoga or kriya yoga or whatever it is, eventually we have to reach the point where we let go of being the doer. And at that point, then the temporary subsidence of the mind, which is attained through samadhi, can become permanent. And that is the stage of full enlightenment. May we all attain it very soon. Om Tat Sat. Om Harihi Om.
And now we have Nome in some meditation instructions, the consciousness of the meditator.
The consciousness of the meditator is the non-objective focus of meditation. Of all that is known, it is the unknown knower. What is its nature? It is self-luminous. and undivided. It is formless and entirely real. It is ever existent and has no boundary. It is indeed the infinite and the eternal. This consciousness, which is Brahman, is truly your existence. And to imagine your identity to be something other than this existence, this consciousness, is merely delusion, made of the stuff of imagination. Meditate by tracing your identity, what you regard yourself to be, inward. In doing so, abandon the misidentification with anything that is other, that is not truly yourself. Whatever is known or is objective cannot be you. You know the body cannot be you. If you are not the body, what are you? You know the mind. It cannot be you. If you are not the mind, not any object of thought, what are you? In this way, deeply wondering about what your true nature is, identify yourself with the pure consciousness. Keep the focus of your meditation on the non-objective knower, yourself. What are you regarding yourself as? What are you truly? Discriminate, discern, inquire, who am I?
And now we will meditate and breathe in and breathe out long, slow breaths. Feel the breath as it comes in, as it goes out. Feel your mind quiet. Notice that you exist. You exist and you know that you exist without feeling it or thinking about it. You just know. Already this is beyond both body feeling or mental thought. We're going to inquire. When you breathe in, Who knows this breath? In the silence between two thoughts, who knows this silence? Who knows the breath? The mind knows the breath. Who knows the mind? The mind knows the silence. Who knows the mind? Now inquire, who am I? What is the nature of my existence? All right. We'll close with a chant. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Questions, comments, discussion?
Hmm. I'm just so relaxed that I can't think of anything. Maybe I've reached the goal.
Yes.
Um,
No mind.
No mind, that's right.
that's about what you'd call it. Yeah, peaceful.
Yeah, no mind means much peace.
Yeah, yeah.
From my
Well,
mathematician viewpoint, they seem like inverse functions.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm always, there's a tape of Nome's that you sent me. It's called The Mind, and I've listened to that I don't know how many times,
Yes.
and it just progresses. all the way down, really to that, the stick that stirs the fire gets burnt up,
Mm.
you know, and it's just so beautifully put together. And I have to listen to that over and over and over. And I'm so
Yes.
grateful to have, you know, because I definitely can get a little off course now and again.
Yes. Yes.
And that just like, it's just like, oh no, I nothing is ever forgotten,
Hmm.
really. So much gratitude.
Yes. Anyway, thank you for joining me this time and letting me share this teaching with you. And we'll continue next week with this review of Upadesa Saram. And namaste.
Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste. And thank
Thank
you.
See you soon.
See you soon. Really soon.